She's exaggerating, Your Honor. As usual. I heard my ex-husband's lawyer say that before I'd even finished sitting down at the plaintiff's table. If you've ever been called a liar for telling the truth, stay with me, this is the last receipt, and it's about to get worse before it gets better. The courtroom smelled like old paper and floor polish, the kind of sterile scent that made my stomach turn every time I walked in. Ms. Bennett, Judge Harrow said, glancing at me over her glasses. Your attorney indicates you have additional evidence to submit today. I do, Your Honor, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My name is Laura Bennett. 6 months into a custody battle I never wanted, sitting across a courtroom from a man who used to promise me forever, and who now wanted the world to believe I'd lost my mind. Before we get to that, Judge Harrow said, Mr. Bennett's counsel has raised concerns about the reliability of prior statements. Ms. Whitfield, you may proceed. Opposing counsel, a sharp-suited woman named Diane Whitfield, rose smoothly from her seat. Your Honor, my client has documented repeated instances where Ms. Bennett has made claims that simply don't hold up under scrutiny, she said. Claims of threats. Claims of intimidation. None of it corroborated. That's not true, I said, before my own attorney could stop me. Ms. Bennett, Judge Harrow said, a warning edge in her voice. Please let your counsel speak for you. My attorney, Rebecca Nash, placed a hand gently on my arm. I forced myself to sit back, jaw tight, pulse hammering in my ears. Across the room, my ex-husband, Mark, sat beside his lawyer, his expression carefully arranged into something like patient concern, the same expression he used to wear right before he said something designed to make me feel small. My client has never threatened Ms. Bennett, Diane Whitfield continued. What we've seen throughout these proceedings is a pattern of escalating, unsubstantiated accusations, consistent with someone under significant emotional strain. I felt my face go hot. Emotional strain. That was the phrase they'd settled on this month, softer than unstable, but meaning exactly the same thing. Here we go again, Mark said, just loud enough for the front row to hear, shaking his head slightly. Another one of her stories. A ripple of quiet movement passed through the gallery, a few of his family members exchanging knowing glances, nodding slightly, like they'd heard this story many times before and already decided which version was true. My sister, Kate, sat 2 rows behind me. I didn't turn around, but I felt her presence, uncertain, like even she wasn't sure what to believe anymore after months of Mark's careful, patient narrative. Your Honor, Rebecca said, standing now, my client has consistently provided documentation to support her claims. Today, we'd like to formally submit an audio recording that directly corroborates the incident referenced in her petition. Diane Whitfield was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, we object to the introduction of any recording not previously disclosed in discovery. It was disclosed 3 weeks ago, Rebecca said calmly. Opposing counsel received the transcript. We're simply asking to play the audio itself today. Judge Harrow studied both attorneys for a long moment. I'll allow argument on admissibility after the recess. For now, let's continue with testimony. I felt my chest tighten, the recording sitting untouched in Rebecca's folder, so close and yet still somehow out of reach. Mark's attorney turned back to me. Ms. Bennett, isn't it true that you've made similar claims before, in your marriage counseling sessions, that were later found to be exaggerated? They weren't exaggerated, I said. They were minimized. There's a difference. By whom? She pressed. By your therapist? Or by you, after the fact, when it served your narrative? My hands curled into fists in my lap, nails pressing crescents into my palms. I'm not building a narrative, I said. I'm telling you what happened. What happened, according to you, Diane Whitfield said, is that my client threatened you in your own kitchen, 6 months ago, using language so severe you felt compelled to call the police. Yet there's no police report. No witnesses. Just your word. There's a recording, I said again, my voice rising slightly. Ms. Bennett, Judge Harrow said, more firmly this time. Please direct your responses through your counsel. I sat back, breathing hard, my face burning with a mixture of humiliation and fury. I thought about that night in the kitchen, the specific, cold clarity of Mark's voice as he told me exactly what he'd do if I ever tried to take our son away from him. The way my hands had shaken so badly I'd nearly dropped my phone, fumbling to hit record before he noticed. I remembered the exact smell of the room that night, burnt coffee, his cologne, too strong, too close. I remembered the way my heartbeat had roared in my ear so loudly I could barely hear my own voice asking him to calm down. None of that mattered right now. Right now, all that mattered was the fact that 6 months later, sitting in a courtroom, I was being asked to prove I hadn't imagined the worst night of my life. "Your witness seems quite emotional, Your Honor," Diane Whitfield said smoothly, glancing toward the judge. "I'd simply note for the record that this pattern, heightened claims, minimal corroboration, has been consistent throughout these proceedings." "Objection," Rebecca said sharply. "Counsel is editorializing." "Sustained," Judge Harrow said. "Ms. Whitfield, move on." But the damage had already settled into the room, quiet and corrosive, the way these things always did. I could feel it in the way a few gallery members shifted slightly away from me, in the way even the court reporter's eyes flicked toward me with something that looked uncomfortably like doubt. Mark leaned toward his attorney and whispered something, his mouth curved into the faintest, most careful smile, the kind of smile designed to look sympathetic to anyone watching, while meaning something else entirely to me. I knew that smile. I'd seen it 100 times during our marriage, right before he twisted something I said into something I never meant. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, rising again, "given the significance of the evidence in question, we'd ask the court to consider an early recess to resolve the admissibility issue before further testimony continues." Judge Harrow glanced at the clock. "We'll take 15 minutes. Counsel, be prepared to argue admissibility when we return." The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted into quiet, shuffling movement. I sat frozen for a moment, my hand still trembling slightly in my lap, the weight of Diane Whitfield's accusations pressing down on my chest like something physical. Rebecca leaned close. "Are you okay?" "They're trying to make me sound crazy," I said quietly. "In front of everyone." "I know," she said. "That's exactly why we need this recording admitted. It's the only thing that stops them from controlling the story." I nodded, throat tight, and stood slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. As I walked toward the courtroom doors, I passed close enough to Mark's table to hear him murmur something to his mother, seated just behind him. "She's always been like this," he said. "Dramatic. You know how she gets." I stopped walking for just a second, my hand tightening around the strap of my bag. I didn't turn around. I didn't give him the reaction he wanted. Instead, I walked out into the hallway, my heels echoing sharply against the tile floor, my heartbeat pounding so loudly in my ears I could barely hear the courthouse noise around me. 15 minutes. 15 minutes until we argued whether the truth would even be allowed into that room. I found a bench near the end of the hallway and sat down, pulling out my phone with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since I'd walked into that courtroom. I opened the folder where I'd saved the original recording months ago, the same night it happened, before I even understood how badly I'd need it. I pressed play, just for a few seconds, just to hear Mark's voice again, cold and controlled, saying the words that had haunted me for 6 months. Then I closed the file, took a slow breath, and looked up at the closed courtroom doors. They'd called me unstable. Dramatic. A woman building a story out of nothing. In 15 minutes, I intended to make sure the entire room heard exactly what had actually happened that night, in his own voice, with no room left for anyone to call it anything other than the truth. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with quiet, restless energy during the recess, attorneys murmuring into phones, families clustered in tense little groups along the walls. I sat alone on my bench, staring at the closed courtroom doors, trying to steady my breathing before we went back in. Kate found me there a few minutes later, sliding onto the bench beside me, her expression unreadable. "You okay?" she asked. "Not really," I said. "They're making me sound insane in there." She was quiet for a moment, twisting her hands together in her lap. Laura, I have to ask you something, and I need you to not get upset. My stomach tightened. Okay. Is there any chance, she said carefully, that you've, I don't know, remembered that night worse than it actually was? Stress does strange things to memory. I stared at her, something cold settling in my chest. You think I made this up? I don't think that, she said quickly. Mark's been saying things to Mom. About how you've always had a flair for the dramatic. And I keep telling myself that's not true, but then I see you in there today, and I don't know, Laura. I don't know what to think anymore. There's a recording, Kate, I said, my voice tight. His actual voice, saying actual words. That's not drama. That's evidence. I know, she said. I believe you have something. I've never heard it. None of us have. We're just supposed to take your word that it says what you say it says. I felt something crack slightly inside me, hearing my own sister voice the exact doubt Mark's lawyer had spent the last hour trying to plant in the judge's mind. You'll hear it, I said quietly. Today, if the judge allows it. Then you won't have to wonder anymore. Kate nodded, but she didn't look entirely convinced, and that uncertainty sat heavy in my chest as she walked back toward our mother, waiting near the elevators. I pulled out my phone again and opened my notes app, scrolling back through months of documentation I'd built without fully realizing, at the time, how much I'd eventually need it. Text messages from Mark, increasingly controlling in tone. A screenshot of a voicemail transcript where his voice had turned sharp, threatening, before he'd hung up abruptly. A saved email where he'd casually mentioned making sure the court sees the real you, months before this hearing had even started. I'd been building a case without calling it that, one screenshot at a time, out of something between instinct and fear. Mark approached while I was still scrolling, his footsteps unhurried, his expression arranged into something gentle, concerned. Laura, he said. Can we talk for a second? Just us. There's nothing to talk about, I said, not looking up. I hate seeing you like this, he said, sitting down uninvited on the bench beside me. Stressed. Exhausted. This doesn't have to be a war, you know. We could still figure this out like adults, outside the courtroom. You mean like the adult who threatened me in our kitchen? I said, finally looking at him directly. His expression flickered, just briefly, something colder passing behind his eyes before the concerned mask slid back into place. I never threatened you, he said quietly. I raised my voice. People do that when they're upset. That's not the same thing as a threat. Play the recording, then, I said. Let's see if raising your voice covers what you actually said. His jaw tightened. You don't have to keep fighting this in front of everyone, Laura. Think about what this is doing to Ethan, watching his parents tear each other apart in a courtroom. Don't, I said sharply. Don't use our son to make me back down. I'm not, he said, his voice softening further, almost tender now. I'm just worried about you. You've seemed so overwhelmed lately. People are starting to wonder if maybe you're the problem here, pushing this so hard. Something in me went very still, hearing him say it so smoothly, so gently, like genuine concern instead of the calculated pressure it actually was. People, I repeated. Or you, telling people that, so it starts sounding true? He stood, adjusting his jacket, his expression cooling slightly. I just want what's best for our son. I thought maybe you still wanted that too. He walked back toward his attorney without waiting for a response, leaving me sitting there, hands trembling slightly around my phone. I thought about the early days of our marriage, when Mark's gentleness had felt real, uncomplicated. I missed that version of him sometimes, even now, even after everything, not enough to forgive what he'd become, but enough to feel the specific grief of losing someone twice, once to the person he actually was, and once to the memory of who I'd thought he could be. Rebecca found me a few minutes before we were due back inside. How are you holding up? She asked. Barely, I admitted. My own sister just asked if I made this up. Mark just tried to convince me I'm the problem for wanting our son safe. Rebecca sat down beside me, her expression steady, grounding. That's exactly the pattern we need the judge to see clearly. This isn't just about one incident, Laura. It's about a consistent effort to control the narrative and make you look unreliable every time you try to tell the truth. Will the recording even get admitted? I asked. What if Diane Whitfield convinces the judge it's inadmissible on some technicality? We have a strong argument, Rebecca said. You disclosed it properly. The chain of custody is clean. I'm confident, but I won't lie to you, nothing is guaranteed in there. I nodded, throat tight, staring down at my hands. Whatever happens today, Rebecca said, I need you to stay calm in there. I know that's hard. But every time you react strongly, it gives them ammunition to keep painting you as unstable. The calmer you are, the more the recording speaks for itself. I can do that, I said, though my pulse was still hammering unevenly beneath my ribs. We walked back into the courtroom together, the doors heavy and cold under my palm as I pushed through them. Mark was already seated, composed, his mother beside him offering a small, sympathetic smile toward the gallery, like she was silently reassuring everyone that her son was the reasonable one in all this. I took my seat beside Rebecca, spine straight, hands folded carefully in my lap, and forced my breathing to slow. Judge Harrow entered a few minutes later, and the room rose briefly before settling back into tense silence. We'll proceed with argument on the admissibility of the recording, Judge Harrow said. Ms. Whitfield, your objection. Diane Whitfield rose smoothly. Your Honor, our concern isn't merely procedural. It's about reliability. We have reason to believe portions of this recording may have been selectively edited to misrepresent context. My stomach dropped. That's not true, I whispered to Rebecca. I know, she murmured back. Stay calm. Let me handle this. Rebecca stood. Your Honor, we're prepared to submit the full, unedited recording, along with metadata confirming it hasn't been altered since the night it was recorded. We welcome any technical review the court wishes to conduct. Judge Harrow studied both attorneys for a long moment, then glanced toward me, her expression unreadable. I'll allow submission of the recording for the court's review, she said finally. Whether it's played in open testimony will depend on what that review shows. Relief and fear tangled together in my chest, sharp and immediate. They weren't dismissing it outright. But they weren't playing it yet either. I sat there, hands clenched tightly in my lap, watching Rebecca hand the recording over to the court clerk, and understood that the next several days were going to determine whether the truth I'd been carrying alone for 6 months would finally be allowed into the room, or buried under one more procedural delay designed to protect the version of events Mark had spent months carefully constructing. The days following the hearing stretched into something unbearable, waiting, always waiting, for a court-appointed technician to review the recording's metadata while my life sat suspended in limbo. I went to work. I picked Ethan up from school. I made dinner, packed lunches, answered work emails, and understood almost nothing that happened around me during any of it. My mind stayed fixed on that recording, sitting in some evidence locker, my entire credibility hinging on whether a piece of software could confirm what I already knew was true. Kate called twice that week. I let both calls go to voicemail. I wasn't ready yet to hear more careful, hedging doubt dressed up as concern. Thursday evening, my mother showed up at my apartment unannounced, something she hadn't done since Ethan was born. Can we talk? She asked, standing in my doorway, her expression pinched with worry. I let her in, mostly out of habit. Kate told me what happened at the hearing, she said, settling stiffly onto my couch. About the recording. About what Mark's lawyer said. They're trying to say I edited it, I said. Like I sat there 6 months ago, calmly splicing together a threat instead of standing in my own kitchen, terrified. My mother was quiet for a moment, twisting her hands together. I just want to understand what actually happened, Laura. Completely. Not pieces of it. You've heard pieces because that's all anyone's let get through, I said. The transcript's been in the court file for weeks. No one asked to read it until now. She looked down at her hands. Maybe fighting this so hard is only making things worse. For you. For Ethan. Mark's family is telling everyone you're determined to destroy him, no matter what it costs. Something cold settled in my chest, hearing my own mother echo Mark's narrative so precisely. You didn't imagine what he said that night, Mom, I said quietly. It's on the recording. Word for word. I just want the truth on record, finally, instead of everyone deciding what version of it they're comfortable believing. She didn't answer right away. I believe there's a recording, she finally said. I just don't know anymore what it actually proves, or what it doesn't. You'll know, I said, when the court finally lets it be heard. Until then, I need you to stop asking me to prove myself to you too. I already have to do that to a judge every week. She left shortly after, the visit ending in strained silence instead of the reassurance either of us had hoped for. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, the same kitchen, still the same room where everything had happened 6 months ago, and let myself feel the full weight of the isolation pressing down on me. I thought about calling Rebecca just to hear a voice that believed me without qualification. Instead, I opened my laptop and started organizing everything I had, one document at a time, the way I'd been doing quietly for months without fully understanding why. Text messages. Emails. The voicemail transcript. A note I'd saved the morning after the incident, typed out while my hand still wouldn't stop shaking, documenting every detail while it was still fresh. I stared at the growing folder and felt something shift slightly, not less isolated, but steadier, like the evidence itself was a kind of company no one could argue me out of. Friday morning, Rebecca called with news. The technician completed the metadata review, she said. The recording is confirmed unaltered. Original file, original timestamp, no evidence of editing. Relief crashed through me so hard I had to sit down. So it gets played. The judge has scheduled a hearing for the full submission next week, Rebecca said. But there's something else you should know first. My stomach tightened. What? Mark's attorney filed a motion this morning, she said, requesting a psychological evaluation, arguing your behavior throughout these proceedings raises concerns about your fitness as a custodial parent. I felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. They're trying to make this about my mental state instead of what he actually said. That's exactly what they're trying to do, Rebecca said. It's a common tactic. Discredit the messenger before the message gets heard. Will the judge grant it? Possibly, Rebecca said carefully. Courts often err toward allowing evaluations when custody's involved, even when the underlying motive is questionable. I want you prepared for that, so it doesn't blindside you. I closed my eyes, exhaustion pressing in from every direction. I've spent 6 months proving I'm telling the truth. Now I have to prove I'm not crazy on top of it. I know it's not fair, Rebecca said. But I also think it might work in our favor, in a strange way. A clean evaluation removes their strongest remaining argument. And once the recording plays, it'll be much harder for anyone to frame your reaction to a genuine threat as instability. I sat with that for a long moment, breathing slowly, trying to find the steadiness Rebecca seemed to have such easy access to. Okay, I finally said. Schedule it. I'll do whatever I need to do. That evening, Kate called again. This time, I answered. I saw Mark at Ethan's school pickup today, she said, her voice hesitant. He said something strange. About how the recording wouldn't hold up once people understood the full context. What context, Laura? There is no other context, I said. He said what he said. That's the whole context. He seemed so calm about it, Kate said slowly. Almost too calm. Like he already knew something we didn't. A chill moved through me, hearing that. What if he's planning something? Some way to spin it, even after it plays? I don't know, Kate said. But Laura, I want you to know something. I went back and reread that transcript last night. All of it, carefully, not just the pieces Mark's family kept quoting out of order. I held my breath. It's bad, Laura, she said quietly. Worse than I let myself believe before. I'm sorry I doubted you, even a little. Something in my chest loosened, hearing her finally say it plainly. Thank you, I said. That actually means more than you know, right now. I want to be there, she said, when it plays in court. I want to hear it myself, and I want Mom to hear it too. I'd like that, I said, my voice thick. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with the folder of evidence spread out in front of me, the psychological evaluation scheduled, the recording confirmed authentic, my sister finally, fully back on my side. The despair that had been sitting heavy in my chest for days hadn't disappeared completely. But underneath it, something steadier was taking root, a quiet certainty that the truth, however delayed, however contested, was finally moving toward the moment it could no longer be denied. Mark thought he knew something we didn't. I intended to make sure that whatever he was planning wouldn't matter once the whole courtroom heard his own voice say exactly what he'd done. The psychological evaluation took place the following Tuesday, 3 hours in a quiet office with a court-appointed psychologist named Dr. Ellen Marsh, her questions careful, methodical, nothing like the ambush I'd braced myself for. You've documented quite a lot over the past several months, she said, reviewing the folder I'd brought. Messages, emails, a recording. That's not typically consistent with someone fabricating a narrative. It's consistent with someone protecting themselves. I felt something in my shoulders ease slightly, hearing a professional say plainly what I'd been trying to prove for weeks. I just want the truth to matter, I said. That's all this has ever been about. I understand, she said. I'll have my full report to the court within 2 weeks. That evening, my phone buzzed with a banking alert I almost dismissed before the description line caught my attention. Joint account, unauthorized withdrawal, $6,200. My stomach dropped. Mark and I still shared one account, a leftover from the divorce proceedings not yet fully settled, meant only for shared expenses related to Ethan. I called the bank immediately, my hands cold around the phone. The withdrawal was made in person, at a branch across town, the representative confirmed. Listed reason, legal fees. I sat with that for a long moment, understanding settling in slowly, coldly. I forwarded the alert to Rebecca immediately, along with a message, he's draining the account to pay for this fight. While accusing me of instability. Rebecca called within the hour. This is useful, Laura. It shows a pattern of behavior, depleting shared resources while painting you as the unreasonable party. I'm adding it to our filing. That week, Kate came by with something unexpected, an old voicemail she'd found, still saved on her phone from over a year earlier. I forgot I even had this, she said, setting her phone on my kitchen table. Mark called me drunk one night, venting about you. I saved it because it upset me, and then I just forgot about it. Until everything with the recording made me start going back through old messages. She played it. Mark's voice, slurred slightly, angry, saying things about controlling the narrative if Laura ever tried to leave, about making sure everyone sees her the way I need them to. My hands trembled, hearing it. Kate, this is from before I even filed. This proves he was planning this specific strategy long before any of this started. I know, she said quietly. I should have shown you sooner. I didn't think it mattered until now. I called Rebecca again that night, forwarding the voicemail with shaking hands. This is significant, Rebecca said. It demonstrates premeditation, not just a single volatile incident. Combined with the recording and the financial pattern, we're building something the court can't easily dismiss. Mark showed up at my apartment 2 days later, something urgent in the set of his shoulders that I hadn't seen since the divorce began. You need to drop this, he said, standing in my doorway, his composed mask finally slipping. The evaluation. The financial complaint. All of it. Why would I do that? I asked. Because you don't understand what you're setting in motion, he said, his voice low, tight. You don't want to keep pushing this, Laura. Think about what you'll lose. Custody arrangements can go both ways, you know. Judges don't always side with the parent who seems the most aggressive. I felt something in me go very still, recognizing the shape of what he'd just said. I already lost my credibility in that courtroom the day your lawyer called me dramatic, I said quietly. Now I'm just deciding what you lose. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, something flickered behind his eyes, not quite panic, but close to it. I'm not trying to threaten you, he said. You're doing a remarkable impression of it, then, I said. Twice now, if I'm counting. He left without another word, and I stood in my doorway for a long moment afterward, my heartbeat finally slowing. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with everything spread out in front of me, the recording confirmation, the bank alert, Kate's voicemail, the psychological evaluation pending, Rebecca's growing case file. I opened a saved note on my phone, the same one I'd started the morning after the original incident, and added a new line: he's not calm. He's scared. That's why he's escalating. Writing it down did something to the fear I'd been carrying for months. It didn't erase it. But it reshaped it into something I understood now, something with a clear cause instead of a vague, formless dread. My phone buzzed. A text from Kate. I talked to Mom. She listened to the transcript in full tonight. She's different now, Laura. I think she finally sees it. I read the message twice, something loosening slowly in my chest. I thought about the version of myself 6 months earlier, hands shaking as I fumbled to hit record in my own kitchen, terrified and uncertain whether anyone would ever believe what had actually happened that night. That version of me had been surviving, one frightened moment at a time. The version of me sitting at this table now, evidence organized, allies slowly returning, a hearing date finally set for the recording to play in full, was building something steadier, not just a case, but the quiet, growing certainty that the truth, however long delayed, was finally close enough to reach. Rebecca's last message of the night confirmed it. Hearing is set for next Thursday. The recording plays in full. Be ready. I read it once, then set my phone down, and for the first time in 6 months, I slept through the night without waking once. Thursday morning arrived clear and cold, sunlight cutting sharp angles across the courthouse steps as I climbed them with Rebecca beside me. Kate met us in the lobby, my mother a step behind her, both dressed carefully, both there to hear the recording play in full for the first time. I'm glad you're here, I told my mother. I should have been from the beginning, she said quietly. I'm sorry it took this long. We filed into the courtroom, the gallery fuller than usual. Word had apparently spread that something significant was happening today. I recognized a few of Mark's relatives near the back, along with 2 people I didn't know, likely colleagues of his, curious about the outcome. Mark sat rigid at the defense table, his usual composed mask noticeably thinner today, something brittle at the edges of his expression. Judge Harrow entered, and the room rose briefly before settling into tense silence. We're here today to resolve the matter of the recording's admission into evidence, she said. Ms. Whitfield, I understand you have additional concerns to raise before we proceed. Diane Whitfield stood, though her usual smooth confidence seemed slightly diminished. Your Honor, we maintain our objection regarding context. Even if authentic, the recording captures a single moment, out of proportion to the broader relationship. You think I didn't notice you trying to get this thrown out on every possible technicality? I whispered to Rebecca, unable to help myself. Rebecca gave a small, steadying shake of her head, and I forced myself back into silence. Your Honor, Rebecca said, standing, the recording is directly relevant to my client's petition. Context regarding the broader relationship is precisely what today's testimony, combined with additional evidence submitted this week, will provide. Judge Harrow considered this for a long moment. I'll allow the recording to be played, followed by testimony regarding its context. Proceed. My heart pounded as the court clerk connected a small speaker to the evidence laptop, the courtroom falling into complete silence. Then Mark's voice filled the room, cold and controlled, exactly as I remembered it. If you ever try to take him from me, Laura, I will make sure you regret it. I'll make sure every single person in your life sees exactly what I decide to show them. You won't win. You'll just lose everything trying. The recording continued for nearly 2 minutes, my own voice audible too, shaking, asking him to calm down, to lower his voice, before it cut off abruptly. Silence swallowed the courtroom whole. I glanced at Kate. Her hand had gone to her mouth, tears already gathering. My mother sat frozen beside her, her face pale. Mark's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him, refusing to look anywhere else. "That recording speaks for itself, Your Honor," Rebecca said quietly into the silence. "But I'd also like to submit a voicemail, recorded over a year prior to this incident, in which Mr. Bennett discusses a specific intention to control how others perceive Ms. Bennett, should she ever attempt to leave the marriage." Diane Whitfield rose quickly. "Your Honor, we haven't had adequate time to review. It was disclosed in yesterday's filing," Rebecca said calmly. "Along with financial records showing a $6,000 withdrawal from a shared account designated specifically for our son's expenses, made shortly after this hearing was scheduled." Judge Harrow's expression had shifted, something sharper and more attentive settling over her features. "Play the voicemail," she said. Kate's recording filled the room next, Mark's slurred, angry voice discussing exactly what he intended to do, long before any of this had officially begun. When it ended, the courtroom remained silent for a long moment. "Mr. Bennett," Judge Harrow said finally, turning toward him directly. "Would you care to explain the context of either recording?" Mark stood slowly, his composure visibly cracking. "Your Honor, that voicemail was from over a year ago. I was upset. I'd been drinking. It doesn't reflect. I'm not the villain in this, no matter how you're trying to spin it right now," he said, his voice rising slightly, defensive. "Then why does your story change every time someone new is listening?" I said quietly, unable to stop myself this time. Judge Harrow didn't reprimand me for it. She simply looked at Mark, waiting. He sat back down slowly, saying nothing further. Diane Whitfield tried once more. "Your Honor, regardless of tone, my client's underlying concern for his son's well-being remains genuine." "I've heard enough for today," Judge Harrow said, cutting her off. "I'll be reviewing the full evidentiary record, including today's testimony, before issuing any ruling. This hearing is adjourned. We'll reconvene in 1 week for closing arguments." The gavel came down, and the courtroom slowly began to stir, murmurs rising around us. I sat frozen for a moment, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear this time, but from the sheer release of 6 months of carried tension finally breaking loose. Kate reached forward and gripped my shoulder. "I heard it," she said, her voice thick. "I heard all of it. I'm so sorry I ever doubted you." My mother leaned forward too, tears streaming freely now. "I believe you, Laura. Completely. I should have from the start." Rebecca turned to me, a small, steady smile breaking through her usual composed expression. "That went about as well as it could have gone today." "Is it over?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. But I think the judge just heard exactly what she needed to hear. 1 more week. Across the room, Mark gathered his things quickly, avoiding every eye, his mother no longer offering sympathetic smiles toward the gallery. I watched him go, and for the first time in 6 months, I didn't feel afraid of what his composed mask might convince someone else to believe. The truth had finally spoken for itself, in his own voice, loud enough that no one left that courtroom today still wondering whether I'd been telling the truth all along. 1 week later, the courtroom filled early, word having spread through the small legal community about what had played the previous week. The gallery held more faces than I recognized, colleagues of Rebecca's, a local reporter who covered family court, a few of Mark's relatives who hadn't bothered showing up before now. I sat at the plaintiff's table, steadier than I'd felt in 6 months, Kate and my mother seated directly behind me. Judge Harrow entered, and the room rose before settling into focused silence. "We're here for closing arguments regarding custody and the admissibility findings from last week's hearing," she said. "Ms. Whitfield, you may begin." Diane Whitfield stood, though her usual polish had thinned considerably. "Your Honor, while the recordings presented are concerning in isolation, We maintain that a single volatile evening, however regrettable, shouldn't define an otherwise devoted father's custodial rights. A single volatile evening, Rebecca repeated, rising when it was her turn. Your Honor, we've established that Mr. Bennett discussed a specific strategy to discredit Ms. Bennett over a year before this litigation began. We've established a pattern of financial control, including a $6,000 withdrawal from funds designated for their son. And we've established, through Mr. Bennett's own recorded voice, an explicit threat made in his ex-wife's kitchen. She turned slightly toward Mark. Your Honor, I'd like to call Mr. Bennett to clarify statements made regarding the voicemail's context, since he was unable to fully address it last week. Judge Harrow nodded. Mr. Bennett, please take the stand. Mark rose slowly, his composure visibly strained as he made his way to the witness stand. His attorney watched with poorly concealed tension. Mr. Bennett, Rebecca began, in the voicemail played last week, you stated an intention to control how others perceived Ms. Bennett, should she leave the marriage. Can you explain what you meant? I was upset, Mark said, his voice tight. People say things when they're upset that they don't mean. You've said that before, about the kitchen recording as well, Rebecca said. Two separate incidents, over a year apart, both dismissed as things you didn't mean. Would you say that's an accurate pattern? Mark's jaw clenched. I love my son. Everything I've done has been to protect my relationship with him. By threatening his mother? Rebecca asked. By draining funds meant for his care to fund a campaign against her credibility? You want to know why? I said suddenly, unable to stay silent, rising slightly in my seat. Rebecca placed a steadying hand near my arm, but didn't stop me. Say it. Say it here, finally, instead of to your mother in whispers, or to my sister when you think no one else is listening. The courtroom went completely still. Mark's hands gripped the edge of the witness stand. For a long moment, he said nothing. Because I knew, he finally said, his voice cracking slightly, that if it came down to her word against mine, no one would believe her. That's how it's always worked. That's how it worked with my father, with my mother, whoever controls the story wins. A ripple of shocked murmurs moved through the gallery. I said it because I wanted control, he continued, quieter now, and I knew no one would believe her over me. I was right, for a long time. Until the recording. I felt something in my chest release, hearing him finally say it plainly, without the careful mask, without the practiced concern. You didn't just underestimate me, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. You underestimated the truth. Mark's mother, seated in the gallery, had gone pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. She glanced toward Diane Whitfield, then back toward her son, something like dawning recognition crossing her features. Mrs. Bennett, Judge Harrow said, noticing the movement, did you wish to address the court? Mark's mother hesitated, then rose slowly. I always told myself he was just, intense. Passionate. I never wanted to believe he'd actually follow through on the things he said when he was angry. Her voice wavered. I'm sorry, Laura. I should have listened to you months ago, instead of assuming you were exaggerating. Kate stood too, unprompted, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. I doubted her too, Your Honor. I want that on record. I doubted my own sister because it was easier than believing someone I'd known for years could be capable of what she was describing. I was wrong. Diane Whitfield attempted one final defense. Your Honor, regardless of the emotional weight of this testimony, my client's underlying love for his son remains. Counsel, Judge Harrow said, cutting her off, her voice firm. I've heard sufficient testimony today. I don't need further argument on that point. She turned toward Mark, still seated at the witness stand, his composure fully collapsed now. Mr. Bennett, she said, you've just testified, in open court, to a deliberate strategy of discrediting the mother of your child through manipulation and threat. That testimony, combined with the corroborated recordings and financial evidence, leaves little ambiguity about the pattern this court has been asked to evaluate. The gallery remained silent, waiting. I'll be issuing a formal ruling in writing within the week, Judge Harrow continued, but I want to be clear on the record today. This court finds Ms. Bennett's account credible, consistent, and fully corroborated. Custody arrangements will be revisited with that finding as the foundation. The gavel came down, sharp and final. Around me, the courtroom stirred, quiet conversations rising in its wake. Kate gripped my hand tightly. My mother was crying openly now, one hand pressed to her chest. Mark sat alone at the witness stand for a moment longer, his mother not moving toward him, his attorney gathering papers without meeting his eyes. I didn't feel triumphant, exactly. I felt something quieter, steadier, the specific, hard-won relief of finally being believed, completely, by the one room that mattered most. I stood, gathering my things, and walked toward the courtroom doors without looking back at the table where Mark still sat, alone, surrounded by a silence he'd finally, fully earned. The courthouse steps were warm with early afternoon sun as Rebecca, Kate, my mother, and I stepped outside together, the heavy doors closing behind us with a sound that felt, for the first time in 6 months, like an ending instead of another delay. "How are you feeling?" Rebecca asked, studying my face carefully. I thought about the question for a long moment, letting the sunlight settle over me. "Lighter," I said finally. I didn't realize how heavy it was, carrying something no one believed, until right now, when I don't have to carry it alone anymore. Kate wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "I'm sorry it took me so long to hear you properly." "You heard me eventually," I said. "That matters more than the delay." My mother reached for my hand, her eyes still red-rimmed. "I want you to know, whatever comes next, I'm not going anywhere." "Not again." "I know, Mom," I said, and found that I actually meant it. We stood there together for a few minutes, the ordinary sounds of the city moving around us, traffic, distant conversation, a bell from a nearby church marking the hour, and I let myself simply exist in the moment without bracing for the next attack. That evening, at home, I sat at my kitchen table, the same kitchen where everything had started 6 months earlier, and opened my phone to the folder where I'd saved every piece of evidence along the way. I scrolled through it slowly. The recording. The screenshots. Kate's voicemail. Months of careful, frightened documentation that had eventually become the thing that saved me. I didn't delete any of it. But I created a new note beside it, something different this time. "Things I know now, the truth doesn't need permission to be true. It just needs enough patience to finally be heard." 10 days later, Judge Harrow's written ruling arrived. Primary custody granted to me, supervised visitation for Mark, contingent on completing a court-mandated program addressing his conduct. I read it twice, sitting alone at my kitchen table, tears finally falling freely, not from grief this time, but from something closer to release. That weekend, Ethan and I sat together in the backyard, sunlight warm across the grass, his small hands carefully arranging a puzzle he'd been working on for days. "Mom," he said, not looking up, "are things going to be okay now?" I sat down beside him, watching him fit another piece carefully into place. "Yes," I said, and for the first time in 6 months, I said it without a single doubt shadowing the word. "Things are going to be okay." He smiled and kept working, unaware of how much had shifted to make that simple, ordinary afternoon possible. I sat there beside him for a long while, watching the light move slowly across the yard, feeling something settle inside me that had been unsettled for far too long. I thought about the version of myself 6 months earlier, hands shaking as I reached for my phone in a kitchen that had felt anything but safe, uncertain if anyone would ever believe what had actually happened that night. That version of me had survived on fear and quiet documentation, one frightened moment at a time. The version of me sitting in the sunlight now understood something she hadn't back then, that being disbelieved doesn't make something untrue. It just makes the truth wait a little longer for the right moment to finally be heard. If you've ever been dismissed when you were telling the truth, called dramatic, unstable, unreliable, simply for trying to protect yourself, I want you to know something. The truth doesn't expire. It waits, patiently, for its moment. If this happened to you too, tell me. I'm listening. This has been The Last Receipt, and this is only one story out of thousands like it. Yours might be next.